Well, we're alive. Welcome to the Possible Podcast, and this is Mo trying to connect my Instagram. So give me a second. There we go. We are live. Go live. Dr. Wale Ojo was here, and just trying to sort out his audio issues. Oh, he's here at the stage. Hello?
Yeah. Can you hear me now?
I still cannot hear you. This
You
is
still cannot. Okay, hold on. Let's try
it's kind of
this.
weird. I can't hear you.
Let's try this. Hold on.
Hold on. Let me play something on YouTube to see if I can hear myself.
You.
This is the weirdest thing. I can't hear you.
Okay. How about now? Nope. This is interesting.
Lollipop.
Communication. Now, can you hear?
Okay. See if that makes a difference. Because I ain't about that life. Not today. Life.
No, now I can hear you. Now I can hear you. I'll try on my phone. Nope. Mm-mm.
This YouTube.
How about now?
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
You can?
Yes.
Okay, hold on. One more trick.
Okay. I've never been more excited for the gift of hearing.
One more trick. Hold on.
Okay. Let's remember what we just did now, because we have to keep that on the back of our hand.
I knew exactly what I did. But
You're sounding great.
done. So we got that. Now let us try. Okay, how about now?
Yes,
good?
I can hear you. I get you. We're still good. Yeah, we're still good. Yeah. And then, there we go. Yeah. We're good.
Yeah, I think we are fine. I think this works.
Okay. Great. All right. Welcome everyone to the podcast. My name is Mo, and today I have just the pleasure of talking to someone I've been wanting to get on the show. You guys, it's been, I want to say 7 years now, right? As long as we started the podcast, because I remember we had a conversation, and I never forgot about that conversation, by the way. And I was like, okay, someday, finally, all the I's were dotted, the T's were crossed, and I'm so glad to have him on the show because you guys are in for a treat. So, today we have Dr. Olawale Ojo, who goes by Wale as a short form of his name. He's a psychiatrist specializing in addiction psychiatry. He began his medical journey at the other university called Obafemi Awolowo University. It's a relatively unknown university in Nigeria, by the way. and continuing his training in New York and Indiana. He's currently the Associate Program Director of the Indiana University Addiction Psychiatry Treatment Program and the Medical Director of the Indiana University Methodist Addiction Treatment and Recovery Center. His work focuses on innovative inpatient consult addiction services, such as intensive outpatient programs and a dual diagnosis outpatient program. We're gonna unbox all of that, so don't worry. Unpack all of that, don't worry. In addition to his professional roles, he enjoys spending time with his family and playing video games. And we're so glad to see him in Oklahoma just a month ago when he came to celebrate T Dog's party. So, welcome to the podcast, Dr. Ojo. Really nice to have you here.
Yes, thank you for having me. It's been a long story in the making.
Yeah, yeah.
At the beginning of your podcast, I was an avid listener, but at that point, I don't think I saw myself being here in person
Why
joining you.
not? Why not?
It's a little bit out of character for me.
um, well, I mean, I'm so honored you're here, by the way, and you're perfect fit for the podcast. But I just think that the story probably wasn't ready then, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
The
yeah.
story get parts, man. There's just a
Yes,
lot.
yes, yes. There's a lot. There's a lot. I don't think
And
we're gonna have enough time.
yeah. You guys were a critical cog. Down the line at some points that really transformed my life in a very significant way. You and T Dog.
No.
I can't go back to calling him Taiwo. Yeah, so
Even you, you know him, BT. You knew him before T Dog. So
oh my god, they keep found me. Hey Oye.
hi. Oh my God. Wait, is this the first or the second one?
This is my first child.
Oh wow, he's grown.
Say hi.
Hi,
Okay.
hi.
Don't join grandma, okay?
He's
And
a
shut the
family
door for
man.
me.
He's a family man. Anyways, let's start from the beginning, very
No,
beginning.
no.
Maybe just
Before we
okay,
start, I need
okay.
to correct an impression.
Whoa, wait. Is that about your relatively unknown university?
Yes,
Everybody knows that. Everybody knows that one.
that I have to correct that. Great Ife is
Ah,
Africa's most beautiful campus. Fact, just a fact. It's known all over the world, all over the US, Europe, the UK. It's a beautiful campus. They have the best graduates. They have the best students. They have the best everything in Nigeria, at the very least. I can't say about all of Africa, but in Nigeria, we have that standard. Forget about the UIs and the Unilags and who else? Yeah, we are just a step above. I'm not dishing those guys, but we are a step above.
the only reason I'm not retorting is because I'm supposed to be nice to all of my guests. That's the only reason. So I'll let you just have this. Are you done? That's the only reason. I'll catch you outside.
Don't let me start singing Great Ife.
catch, catch me outside the podcast, outside the microphone. We'll talk. Anyways, let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about your background and I mean, just how you grew up and what also drew you to psychiatry.
So I am the first child of four. I was born and bred and raised in Lagos. My dad was an art teacher, and my mom, had a shop at the house. And for me, that was kind of middle class in terms of what the socioeconomic status was in Nigeria back then.
Mm,
But I also had this, background of being second generation in the family to be educated on both sides of the family.
nice.
So it was a household where you had to meet a certain standard because my dad was a teacher. Most
Hmm.
of the schools I attended were by people who knew him. Latmos Comprehensive College had an owner that worked with my dad in the past. Same thing with my primary school, Cornerstone
The pressure. There's so much pressure.
Yeah, so you have to maintain that standard. We grew up speaking English. You had to, be first or second or third in class. And also, the thought when I was in the junior secondary classes was that I was more attuned to arts. And my dad had the impression that I was going to be an artist like he was or like he is. But GS3 came and I wasn't quite decided. I did some art classes. I did some science classes. I loved geology, geography. So when it was time to make that decision and I told my dad that I was going to be in science class, he was very shocked. Something else that really pointed me in that direction was the fact that my art projects in GS3 was so bad. It was 4 of us in art class, and 3 of them got to the state final, got picked for the state competition, and mine didn't get picked. So I think that just influenced me to be a science guy, and I love science.
Yeah.
So secondary school went on, ended up in Great Ife. First choice was medicine, second choice was geology, which
Very random.
very random. But that's kind of who I am. That I'm glad that I grew up in a house where you get to follow your dreams.
That's good. It's a gift.
So that really didn't make sense to many people, but those are the 2 things I loved. I either wanted to study rocks or I wanted to study people. So I applied to medicine. We had a mentor who was a former student of my dad, Shegun Badejoko, who was in Ife at that time in medicine. And, him coming back home, showing me his books, looking at pictures, I was just very fascinated by medicine. So I was lucky enough to get into medicine in Ife. And yeah, the way Ife is, we have a reputation of being very tough. That was not an easy journey for me. The other peculiar thing about getting into college was that because of my, the pressure on me and my siblings, we excelled under the pressure. So it ended up being a situation where I was ready to go to college at 14. So I graduated from secondary school at 14. And there was an issue back then in 2000. I can't remember what exactly the problem was, but we ended up resuming in 2001 when I was 15, thank God. But I got into Ife with that, I'm 3 years younger than most folks
Most of the class, yeah.
in the same class. And that played a great role in how I interacted with them and with the world around me. I had dreams that, didn't necessarily come to pass. I was going to be an attending by 28, retire by 40, travel around the world. Very naive stuff back then when I was, 15, 16. Those were my dreams. But it also played into things like dating. You really couldn't hang around people older than you. It was so obvious at that age. But my first year I was quite small, and by my second year I grew really, really tall. So it was more of a vertical growth. There wasn't too much horizontal. But at least by my second year, I was able to
catch up anyway,
adapt a little bit more, and developed very wonderful friendships along the way. Some of those people are my core folks. I don't have too many friends, but when I really click with someone, I keep that relationship going. But Ife was not an easy journey. Ife was tough, unnecessarily tough. So many sad experiences, so many triumphs. Medical school was no joke. But I think I began to enjoy things when I got into my clinical years. By year 4 and year 5, things became more. At that point, I could relate to, I could relate my dreams and desires to what I
What
was
you were
actually
studying?
doing.
Yeah.
Yes. And at that point, in my 5th year of medical school, we had the psychiatry rotation. And it came at a very difficult moment. So Ife has 2 campuses, one in Ife and one in Elisha at the Wesley Guild Hospital. No one wants to go to Wesley Guild because it's just a more rural setting. But I, was unlucky enough to have been transferred to Elisha. At the beginning of the psychiatry rotation, we had a quality of life survey, and my quality of life at that point, I think, was probably a 2/10 because I was
Wow.
just unhappy about being in Elisha. But that rotation really shaped me because, psychiatry is so fascinating. You don't necessarily have what other aspects of medicine has in terms of demonstration of the pathology. There are no slides to look at. There are no real imaging to relate to. But you're able to make a diagnosis. And unlike other aspects of medicine, for example, I'm not dissing anyone, but for example, with high blood pressure, it's typically idiopathic. And for every patient that comes into the office, they seemingly have just very similar histories. In psychiatry, things are very different. You're making a diagnosis of depression, but the story varies widely from individuals to individuals. Sometimes you have trauma involved. Even with the psychosis, there's just a huge amount of variability with how each patient presents. So, I find that to be very stimulating. I find that to be challenging. You have to get down to knowing your patients at a certain level to be able to help them. So, that was where the love for psychiatry came in to play. I came to the US after finishing medical school and house job, and lost touch with that side of me for a very long time, just because I was the opportunities where I was in Houston wasn't as good in psychiatry. It was really difficult to get an experience. But fortunately and unfortunately, it took me a very long time to get into residency. And in that time period, I rediscovered my love for psychiatry. I actually ended up doing an observership in an addiction psychiatric clinic. I did my master's in neuroscience. I was pushed to do public health, but I just knew at the back of my mind that I don't vibe with statistics or epidemiology or whatnot. That's not my thing. So going into neuroscience as a foothold, or to develop the background in psychiatry. But I was also working, so I transitioned from an observership to having a job, and I was a lab technician for a methadone clinic collecting PP. So just to make enough money to drive down to school. My school was about 90 minutes from the house.
Wow.
So I would walk from 5:30 in the morning to around 12, 1, and then drive to school, do my classes, head back around 10, get home 12, 12:30, rinse and repeat for 2 semesters. But I was making so little money that the money was just enough to get myself to school.
Yeah.
So I did all of that until 2016 when I got into residency finally, in a wonderful place in New York,
New York.
which
Yeah.
is the Interfaith Medical Center. And Interfaith is known for addiction treatment. We have a big rehab and detox unit. So that again strengthened the love for addiction psychiatry. We published a paper, I think, in my second or third year that just reflected how much of addictions was going on in patients that came into the hospital. And the chairman of the program at that point, also Dr. Akerele, was an addiction psychiatrist. So it was just natural to move on to addiction psychiatry. And, found myself in Indiana in the fellowship program. Didn't feel like moving anywhere because Indiana is so lovely. And there's just a lot to be done here. Most of the programs that I'm a part of right now are things that I started from scratch.
Oh, wow.
Or required, significant changes on my part. So, that's the journey so far.
Wow. Thanks for, I mean, you've answered like about 6 questions just by that. So thank you. You're a very good guest. Let's talk a little bit about cultural values. So contrasting Nigeria with the US, right? In Nigeria, mental health is often stigmatized. Not that it's not stigmatized here, but we know like issues like depression and anxiety, the so-called boutique diseases. You can just say, I have depression, anxiety, compared to like saying, oh, I'm manic or bipolar or how did you navigate this cultural perceptions during your training, and how would you say that experience has influenced your approach to patient care?
Yes, that is just huge cultural divide, between countries, not just Nigeria and the US. There's also one between the US and the UK. When I talk to my friends who are psychiatrists in the UK, the perspective and view of things is very, very different, and even treatments is different, It's very hard to get on Adderall in the UK, but in the US, a family physician can prescribe Adderall. So, I am very lucky to have experienced psychiatry in Nigeria and here in the US. Not many people have that unique view of things. For one, with regards to etiology of the diseases, Nigerians, especially in the southwestern part of Nigeria, have a more religious, supernatural, supernatural explanation for some of the symptoms that patients experience. So, you hear about village people, the enemies, and, those things are not entirely rooted in fantasy. There is some reality to that, in my opinion. But I think we tend to also overplay what that is. And in terms of treatment, there's also that religious bias where many of the patients who seek treatments in Nigeria have been to different religious centers for treatments. Some of them, some people get exploited in looking for these solutions before they end up coming into the hospital. Now, those, my explanation is for the core, psychiatric illnesses that are not deniable, psychosis, bipolar, where everyone knows that something is going on and something is wrong. With anxiety and depression, there is a different flavor. There's, that denial or lack of acceptance of the diagnosis. And, with that comes a lot of shame and guilt when people, end up acknowledging these emotions. They begin to feel a certain way. It's not acceptable to talk about it. It's not acceptable to seek treatment. So there's a lot of hiding behind different things. We don't want an explanation for the things we feel. So basically those are the two main variations that I've picked up. Now, here in the US, I've met a few Nigerians I've been privileged to treat a few Nigerians and I think things are changing, even back home in Nigeria. There are more people willing to talk about things. I also think that we have, there's, in a way, mental health in Nigeria is a lot worse. A recent study, I believe last year or 2 years ago, by some of my colleagues that are here in the US and at Yale, Nigeria probably has the highest rates of suicide in Africa.
Well, don't talk about that.
Yes, and the question is this? Are we finding out because we didn't pay attention in the past, or are things just getting worse? That is what I'm not quite sure of yet. But at least we are talking about it now.
Yeah, and that's quite problematic. And I think also maybe just the boon of social media, we're able to see more and hear more about these cases. But I like to imagine that, and given also the shame that comes with suicide, some families are not so quick to disclose the cause of death, right? Yeah. No, it's okay. You're okay.
Guys.
Hi, kiddos. I have one of them at home. So
I'm in a podcast right now. Can you shut the door, please? And don't come back here. Take taller stuff, please. Take taller stuff. Tell grandma to come.
And I also think that another big issue we have in Nigeria, our healthcare spending is really low. Like we spend less than 5% of our GDP on healthcare. And a lot of that overwhelmingly has gone into malaria, HIV. Even as a cancer scientist, we're seeing that cancer, more people are coming down with, younger people are having like aggressive forms of cancer. So the healthcare system is not quite robust enough. We haven't even taken care of cancer. Now we're talking about mental health. Do we even think mental health is like something to consider, So there's so many issues. Another question I'd like to ask you is this: it's about the religious setting. I mean, a lot can be said about churches and mosques and organizations exploiting people, but I'd like to also talk about my perception of this is there's a lot of good they do, and of course there's a lot of bad they've done, but we cannot discount the effect they've had on mental health. Now we can talk about just how religiosity as a whole can be a huge like red flag for like psychotic issues when people are so hyper religious and all that. But what do you think about this perception of mine that without the religious settings we have in like the churches and the mosque, I think we'll probably have worse mental health because they do a lot because think about the pastors that have to do counselings and even going to church and seeking power from a higher power. Those are like some protective mechanisms that really help so many people. Now we can talk about that and also talk about the bad side of it. But I think as a whole, those structures in place are doing a lot more in those settings compared to here where not everybody's religious and they can rely on their healthcare. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's this sense of community that comes with religion, sense of belonging.
For real, yeah.
In terms of just your regular life, taking care of the kids, you always have someone in church that you could call on to watch your kids, right? The sense of, just kinship with someone else. You are part of the men's group, you are part of the women's group, you are part of the youth group. That is very helpful. One of the earlier psychiatrists in Nigeria, and I really struggle to remember his name right now, wrote a whole chapter on how we can't really move forward in psychiatry or in healthcare in Nigeria without involving some of this health, religious leaders. It's probably impossible. It's a cultural thing. We as psychiatrists or therapists or psychologists have to find a way to explore that realm in a way that positively influences our patients. The one thing we don't want to see is the two aspects are not mutually exclusive.
Correct, yeah.
They're things you can combine. Many people ask me, how are you a psychiatrist that believes in God or that is a Christian? I can do both.
Yeah.
It's not mutually exclusive. You can go to church and pray for healing. You can go to church and scabash all you want and have faith and take your medications at the same time. It's not mutually exclusive. I think most of the problems that I've experienced is when people kind of separate, this is medicine and this is God, and there's no overlap. Well, God gave us the knowledge for medicine. You have to think of it that way. God gave someone the knowledge, and that person has made a medication that helps with this particular symptom. And if you took the medication and you prayed, they're not interacting negatively with each other. But in dealing with patients in Nigeria, because I've had the opportunity to speak to a few people who are based in Nigeria, like patients, their pastors or their imams are very, very, important to them. And you don't want to approach them with a sense of, don't.
Yeah, don't do that. You're gonna lose them.
Don't do that. Yeah. You don't want to approach it that way. You want to find a way that the imam or the pastor is going to help you. You want to find Bible verses or parts of the scriptures that your patients would relate to. So that's kind of my approach. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's something that is just within our culture, irrespective of what type of religion. Even the traditional religion has its own uses. One of my friends, Sean Fadikwe Champion, who is a psychiatrist in the UK, was going to start a sleep medicine lab in Ife. He actually did start it. And one of his first points of contact was to talk to, the traditionalists about their perspective of sleep, because that really influences the Yoruba beliefs about sleep. There's some things that we say in Yoruba, and there's some ways we act around sleep, So you have to talk to the original guys who know about history, who know about the incantations and the stories about sleep, to have a good understanding of how Yorubas relate to sleep in order to establish a sleep lab.
Yeah.
So there's an interlink that we shouldn't ignore.
I so agree with you, and I've seen that approach really work, even for because my work in cancer, we do a lot of transatlantic studies looking at men, especially Black men, because I do prostate cancer work from America, Caribbean countries, African countries. And we know that, especially for the ones based in the motherland, for you to get them, you need to get that buy-in from their religious leaders. You want to do free screening and talk about the importance of screening, make it a church fair and a free health fair and put it in the church and let the leaders come on the pulpit and announce it. Otherwise, you're not going to get that buy-in. And I think that's the gap we're really missing. And it's not too far-fetched, because this approach can be compared to, for example, how traditional Chinese medicine is deeply integrated into mental health care in China. As a matter of fact, my colleagues, when we were in grad school together, those that studied pharmacy, within their curriculum in pharmacy school, they had TCM embedded in their curriculum. Even in India, Ayurvedic medicine is commonly used as a holistic, approach that incorporates both the physical and mental well-being. And I think that's something we are yet to tap, into as Nigeria as a whole. Almost like we look at the church, like, or even the mosque or the religious leaders as separate from, but they're really moving a lot.
Actually, for malaria was traditional Chinese root.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we have, the Ewe and Egbos in that traditional setting that might have a good use pharmacologically that we
haven't honest. Yeah. There's a story of even Nico-san, who I bought because the guy who invented it or discovered it is dead now, but his son was here some episodes ago, and that drug does wonders for people with sickle cell. It actually, they've been able to sequester the ingredients in it. There's a lot of controversy around it, but that's a drug that really works, because right now we don't have a lot of modifying therapies for sickle cell. But as far as preventive occlusive crisis and helping to relieve pain, that drug was a wonder drug, and I used to sell it when I was practicing pharmacy. All right, let's talk a little bit about addiction. This is, I think, my bubble broke sometime in 2018 when I went back home to Nigeria, and this was when I think Naira Marley's song Soapy came out. I think this was when everybody was saying I'm in Malian, and I started hearing about codeine, cough syrup, and tramadol, and I'm like, this was not the Nigeria I grew up in. Did I grow up in? And I mean, I grew up rough, by the way. I grew up in Shomolu, so it wasn't like I grew up in a fantastic suburb of Nigeria or anything like that. But I'm like, drug addiction wasn't like something. I mean, we knew uncles that would smoke weed, but addiction wasn't like something that I saw growing up. So going back home and learning about young people, and I think I've reached out to you a couple of times to seek addiction help for some of people that I know that these are young, people in their 20s needing to go to rehab, and you've been so wonderful about that. By the way, I want to just say thank you. Let's talk about just addiction. Why do you think? Let's start with Nigeria before we now talk about your work in the US. Was it something where we're not noticing, kind of like suicide? Has it always been there? What do you think is responsible for just this high synthetic use of marijuana and all those drugs on the streets that are really, really killing our youths these days? What do you think is responsible for the increase in those incidents?
So the world is a global village. Just like the case with depression, for example. You can be in your living room in Lagos and know and understand how someone in New York lives, and comparing and contrasting your life to them, to that fellow who you probably don't know, really plays a part in feeling depressed, right?
Yeah.
Same thing with drugs. You're aware of people out there who are, having these experiences. People travel a lot more now, going out for vacations, or at least seeing some of these things online. That plays a big role in terms of introduction of some of these drugs into Nigeria. Now, I'll kind of agree with you that um, it's not something we saw back then as kids,
Oh,
but it was very present back then.
really?
Maybe different substances. Alcohol was something that was prevalent.
Yeah. I mean, there's a
Yeah,
socialization
in
of
some
alcohol.
schools.
You can drink alcohol publicly, but you can't be snorting cocaine before people
Yeah,
look at you
yeah,
like,
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Um, alcohol was a big thing back in the days, but now you're looking at more interesting substances.
Very deadly
Cannabis.
ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not really, cannabis isn't something I we'll talk about cannabis separate.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
the tramadols, the methamphetamine,
The synthetic marijuanas, the
the
Colorados, the K
Colorado, yeah,
spices, and I'm like,
yeah.
what in the world? Like, what is happening?
And the truth about drugs is that when there is a market,
There's a supply, yeah, there's a demand,
the,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
there's always the supply. They
Hmm.
find ways to manufacture, they find ways to ship it in. As soon as you create that market, which I believe social media has played a big role in,
Hmm.
it's becomes very difficult to control. Um, you know, so the young people are very impressionable, and it's the same everywhere in the world. Your brain is just making those synaptic connections and pruning the ones that are not needed, keeping the ones that are needed. If at that stage of life you're introduced to something, and you get that dopamine spike, it becomes very difficult to change those habits. But yeah, you're right. This is something that is more and more prevalent. I watch my wife's Instagram feed. You see people tripping. Crystal met wasn't something that I expected to see in Nigeria, but it's
Same here. How
it's
did it go?
very,
How did they get across the border?
and I read the news. There's just a lot going on in Nigeria, but it's going on everywhere else in the world. But it's a side effect of globalization, in my opinion.
So let's talk about some of the. We can talk about the top-down approach, but I feel like a lot of these things have foundational issues, right? And so here's my thought about it. Let me know what you think. And I'm also someone that's very, very interested in the mind, especially how we like behavioral issues, right?
Mhm.
And I think a lot of things come down to the childhood and just some of the issues around the family dynamics. Now, we can't blame that as solely responsible for it, but I think a lot of the patterns you see, especially gaps in, youths not being able to get that support, because again, their brains, the way they're growing up, almost like a sponge, anything good or bad, they will just soak into it.
Yep.
So I feel like a lot of it can be explained, not away, but a huge variance of that behavior can be from family dynamics or maybe childhood trauma, and maybe parents not just being available. I mean, they could be home, but you know that your parents go to work like 8 to 5. By the time they're home, they're like tired, and maybe you went, you're a day student, your friends are doing this. Before you know it, you thought you were smoking weed, but it was weed laced with something else,
Yeah.
and you're hooked.
So
What do you think about that? Yeah,
if you think of it, so there is an aspect to it. There is nature and there is nurture,
natural.
right? So the nature piece would be talking about genetics. There is a strong genetic basis to addiction. So if a member of the
Family
family,
member. Yeah,
dad, uncle, mom, has an addiction, there is a high chance that a child might develop an addiction. But the nurture piece is what you really struck on. Looking at the role of trauma, right? But also family dynamics in terms of, when I was growing up, my mom was available every time I got back from school. I was coming home to my mom. In fact, I remember um, it was, there was a time in school. I can't remember how old I was, but she asked me to spell something, and I couldn't spell it, and I remember very well how she chased me in the rain to whoop me because I couldn't spell well. But my point is, she was always available. She was always involved. Another story that I remember well was going back to school to tell. So I did my homework with my mom, and she told me something, and I said she was wrong. And she went to school to confront my teacher to tell him that I said she was wrong, and my teacher whooped me. Like, what do you mean your mom is wrong?
the good old days.
So, but the point is that they were very involved. She knew what was going on. She was available. There was no point after 3-4 p.m. till bedtime where my mom wasn't in the picture. And my dad would come in later on,
And pick up.
also
Yeah.
heavily involved.
Yeah.
Now, these days you can't afford to sit at home. You have a working mom, you have a working dad. Maybe if you're lucky and rich enough, you have a nanny. These are parents pulling 9 to 5. It's really difficult to influence how your child grows up. They go to school, do whatever. You have no opportunity to talk to them about stuff. These days, I have a very funny habit that my mother-in-law finds to be, strange. I like to shower the kids in the morning and at night, because for me, that's my most intimate interaction with
With
them
them.
during
Yeah.
the day. Because I'm out by 8, we are rushing. You drop them off at school. By 5 or 6, you pick them up and you're tired and exhausted. What time do you really have to interact with these kids? So the nurture piece is really, really strong. And that's what you alluded to. There's just a lot that has gone on with how society views parenting and the family that impacts the vulnerability to having addictions. And not just addictions to substances. If you looked at behavioral addictions,
Oh yeah. Yeah.
video
To
games,
different.
sex,
Yeah. Yeah.
food,
Yeah.
to social media, there's a lot going on out there.
Yeah, I think it goes to addictive personalities again, which can be genetically transferred. So it could be to sugar or to devices, and that can be transferred to anything else,
Yep.
easily. Yeah. Um. So let's talk about your work. You have two roles that you play where you currently work. What are some of when it comes to like the perception of addiction and how it's being managed? What do you think are some of the differences you see in their approach? Contrasting your experience as a Nigerian trained doctor and also a US trained doctor when it comes to addiction.
Yes, there's a lot of differences. Training in Nigeria, I had zero exposure to addictions. And even right now, the services are quite, rudimentary. There's just a lot that, we need to do for the folks in Nigeria. And I'm hoping at some points in my career, I'm able to head back and, do some work. But in the US, it's probably more developed. There's differences by region and states. So, I mentioned my experience in New York. New York as a state probably has the most developed services for mental health, period.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, in the heart of Brooklyn at Interfaith Medical Center, we had 40 beds dedicated to addictions. We had the methadone program. We had the Suboxone program.
Oh, wow.
Indiana, not so much.
I mean, population is less heterogeneous compared to New York. Yeah.
Yeah, there's just a lot of gaps, and I think that was one of the things that made me stay. Just the opportunity to grow something. So my clinic, my outpatient clinic, was something that I started from scratch. Like there was nothing. I was the first person, or I am the first person in the Indiana University system to have an outpatient clinic downtown. There was no presence in Indianapolis. We had presence in Bloomington, we had presence in other organizations. We had addiction psychiatrists working for other organizations, but within the IU system itself, I was number one, and hopefully we grow that number out. But also in terms of perception, there are things that we would typically do in New York. I speak to friends that are in Yale, that are in California. Some of those things you can't really pull off in Indiana, especially when it comes to collaborating with other physicians who don't quite have a modern view of addiction.
Of the addiction, yeah. To them, it's just like, don't drink, then you'll be fine. Stop using it, yeah.
So I collaborate a lot with pain management services because, people with opioid use disorder might have pain issues.
Yeah.
And just the differences in perception, like send these guys to Dr. Ojo and get them to stop smoking, or get them to stop using this.
The miracle worker.
it's just very difficult, but we are trying to change that culture. Something that I do a lot frequently these days is assessing patients with liver or heart transplant. And in terms of research, we don't have too much going on that addresses the... Paula, can you go to grandma, please?
Hi, Paula.
Okay. Grandma is going to take care of you, okay? Okay. So, for example, you get denied a heart transplant if you smoked cannabis.
Oh, wow.
Yes. And they need you to be 6 months off of cannabis. And I've seen a few very, bad stories play out. But in reality, the science behind that is a transposition of studies looking at the liver and alcohol,
and then just
cannabis and the heart. Like there's no correlation. There's no scientific basis for doing that. But someone has codified that into a policy, and they religiously follow that policy. But you can't just also come on in and attempt to change the system. You have to come in a very friendly way,
Yeah.
find ways of collaborating on the things that you agree on, and hopefully change the culture. And things are changing. Most recently, I started up a clinic, an addiction psychiatric clinic within the liver clinic, as a way of reaching patients with alcohol use disorder and severe liver, dysfunction. And, interacting with me, knowing who I am, discussing cases has opened doors to discuss some of these things. Like, do we really need to wait 6 months for
that, yeah.
cannabis when it has no sort of impact on the liver? Can we get 4 months here? Can we do 3 months here? Can we help this guy out in this way? So those are some of the things that I find fascinating with my current work, like just going into uncharted territory and just doing something.
Yeah. For your patients, thank you for sharing that, especially just the social issues around, policies that are being made that can impact, the kind of care patients will get. I imagine you've seen a lot of patients across your practice. For patients who have really, really, done better, or whatever better might be, maybe kick the addiction, or they've been able to just live well-adjusted lives without, whatever they were addicted to, command, like, controlling them and being less productive and all that. What do you say? What do you think are like the characteristics, or what are the supportive factors that really help patients do better when it comes to addiction?
I'll tell
Controlling
you,
for whatever substance it might be.
I don't think I get paid enough to do what I do. So that's a different story. My payment or the satisfaction I have is when patients come back and they're doing fine, or preferably not seeing them again and knowing that they're doing fine. That's the thing that brings me the most joy. I saw someone who had disappeared for 8 months. And I was wondering about him. He, popped into the clinic one day and just told me that he was doing fine and thanked me. Those are things that makes me want to keep doing what I'm doing. Now, the things that help people get there, we can divide into, internal and external stuff. And the internal piece is that internal motivation to get better. I've gotten to a point in my life where I need to change. I need to change something. I need to change this. I need to stop this. So I need to start that. Of all the things that I could give to my patients, that internal motivation is probably the most difficult thing to do. Now, the external factors, external motivation, is helpful in getting the patients into the clinic or helping them pick out the care that they need. Having support, family support from me as a provider, support from, wife, the kids, support from the system. You really, the way addictions is, by definition, addictions is a set of behaviors that you continue despite negative consequences. So you continue the behaviors that is associated with the use of a substance despite having bad consequences. As a society, having more negative consequences in the picture isn't helpful because they already have an addiction. So going to jail because you have an addiction isn't helpful. That's just one more to the millions of other things that you're doing wrong already.
Yeah.
But working with some of these, structures within the community, like, for example, DCS, providing a caseworker for the patients that transports the patient from their house to the clinic, interacting with a judge or with a lawyer in a way that minimizes the legal consequences of crimes committed, advocating for a patient to do a drug court, which is kind of a diversion program rather than being incarcerated. Those are some of the things that I think as the society has put in place to help, but there's just still a lot to be done in that regard. I think many of my patients still don't have access to some of the things that they need.
Yeah.
But I mean, we do all we can.
Yeah. Thanks for highlighting, especially those intrinsic and extrinsic factors. There's this channel I follow on YouTube, Soft White Underbelly, and he's based in Los Angeles, and he talks to people from all walks of life. Like, you see people go from, day one on cocaine, and he's just giving them an opportunity to talk about it. You see them just deteriorate. Yeah. And that whole issue of incarceration, I've seen it being argued for, like the argument for and against it. Of course, you arresting somebody doing drugs is almost like you're just, almost like saying that the addiction is solely their problem. But there could be some other issues that it's just, they're totally helpless against it in most cases. But I've also heard family members saying that if we didn't jail them, that was the only way they could not have, gotten into like further harm. Maybe they could have just gone to take, they would think that, smoking marijuana, but it's marijuana lives with fentanyl. And for them to even rely on these correction systems as a safekeeping measure, I think it says a lot about the society we live in. And I also contrast that with Nigeria. It's such an ironical part of it that we don't have very robust systems, but the family and the social support, it kicks into like whole overdrive. Like, even contrasting my experience as a former foster parent, like the whole fostering and all that is not mechanisms that we have in Nigeria. They'll just send to go and live with your cousin somewhere, your auntie, somebody, again, there's some bad things that can happen there, but we don't have those systems. So all in all, I see this too, like Nigeria and the US, and I see just some of the good things happening in one versus the good things the other one has. And it's like, you know what? They both have their issues, but there's some good things, especially Nigeria has that we don't really, really talk about. And that social support, the religious organizations, the family support, like good or bad, that you have a family that cares about you, and they rather you kill them inside that you take your bad habit outside. That's something that I feel like is sometimes missing in the US.
Yes. Yeah. So historically, the US has had this relationship between the law and society and drugs. And if you look at the history of drugs and alcohol, we had prohibition. At some point,
and then the Reagan times of saying no to drugs.
War on drugs, and
war on drugs. Just say no.
Historically, those policies have failed. Mm-hmm. But they've clearly failed. But at the same time, you also don't want to not punish crime.
Yeah.
Right. And you don't want to punish a specific subset of the society for crimes that other people would get away with. So the war on drugs, that shifted a lot of, women who have committed nonviolent crime, minority groups, African American men,
especially,
and there's just this disparity between crack cocaine in the African American society and your
fentanyl. And fentanyl now in white communities.
And everyone's talking about fentanyl now.
But they've been talking about it many years ago in black community. Now it's a big issue because white people are being suburban white women are being addicted. It's like
but I also think we could improve on. There's a lot of cultural issues that the US has in terms of developing an addiction in the first place. I talked about people walking into clinics and getting Adderall, no questions asked. It's not the same in the UK. This whole opioid crisis was something that started off because people could get, as a society,
prescriptions,
we focused on pain.
Mm-hmm.
And one was keeping an eye on how things were going. Right
It
now
just
we are
came down
talking
to
about,
grade. If you think about the Sackler
yeah,
family and Purdue and all that, it came down to
it's
grade. Yeah.
capitalism at its
The
worst.
at its worst, the
Yeah.
evil side of capitalism,
Yes. You have this
overconsumption,
this need for wanting answers now
now and quickly.
and resolve my problems as quickly as possible.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think that's the main problem we need to fix.
yeah. You're so right. And even the isolation too, the societal isolation. You know, like I knew that whether I had mental health issues back home in Nigeria, I couldn't have been able to tell. But it became more obvious when I moved to the US. Like, because I was never that way. And I started paying more attention to myself. Like, man, I'm so lonely here. You have to have social capital to be able to have good mental health.
Mhm,
you
mhm.
know and if you don't have the capital to move in some spaces, you're denying a lot of stuff. But back home, like even you just walking down the streets, you probably have like 10 interactions, whether you agree to it or not. Is your kind of man saying fine girl, or auntie, I've not seen you in days, or how are you doing? Those conversations on your way to the bus stop, they do a lot for your mental health. But
Yeah,
here, you just pull into your garage door. You might never see your neighbors for like a whole year.
yeah,
Nobody's packing your clothes when the rain is falling, packing your clothes and putting inside for you. Or say, let me watch after my kid. I need to run to the market. Or nobody. You don't even hear
yeah.
kids playing outside anymore. So those little conversations, how they do to your mental health, it becomes more obvious when you come here and you realize, man, it's so lonely at the top. Literally, like Ashaka said. Okay.
Yeah, I probably met criteria for depression at some point in my first few years here in the US, just
Mm.
because I felt so out of place and just strange. Like no one understood me. No one around me knew exactly what I was going through. It's the struggle was real.
Yeah. And I know this time of the year we have new people coming to the country, international students. All that to say, we hope that you will take care of yourself. It's okay to not be okay, but seek help. Unlike where you're coming from, if you're from Africa, mental health here is something you can actually talk about, and your universities will have mental health services. So reach out to them and seek help. It's you're gonna feel wonky, but it gets better. That's all I'm trying to say. It
It
gets better.
does. It
Yeah,
does.
yeah. Let's talk about women's health real quick. This was one of the reasons why I wanted to bring you on the podcast. I remember when we had a conversation on the podcast, and you had reached out to me to say that talking to your patients about, especially patients that went through pregnancy losses, and talking to them about the expectations that were not met was some of the things you had never even considered in your practice. And I just thought, oh, thanks for that feedback. So let's just talk about women's health, right? There's this societal expectations and pressures, such as, balancing career, conforming to gender roles, and all that. In what way do you think those societal norms contribute to the perceived imbalance in mental health care and support for women compared to men?
Yes, I've also had since we spoke about that topic, I've had the opportunity to, and I'm still doing it, experience perinatal addictions treatments,
Um,
and that even adds another layer of
that's so sad. Even the name
you know,
perinatal addiction, like, yeah.
yes, it's just women are quite different from men.
Mm-hmm. In what
Um,
way? I mean, we know that, but in what way? I want to hear from your voice.
Yeah, so just biologically, this exposure to estrogen and
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
they have some testosterone, but estrogen and progesterone,
Oh, overproduced, yeah.
with this cyclical experience
Changes.
I
Yeah.
have, about once a month, plus that burden of being a homemaker, in most societies. um and many women these days are kind of stuck in that in between. I'm kind of a homemaker, but I'm also expected to bring in income, right? So a lot of women your age, my age, are stuck in that middle ground where I'm trying to make my home, and I'm trying to make
Rocket
some
at work.
money. I'm
Yeah,
trying to be
yeah.
a professional. I'm trying
And a
to
boss lady at
get
work.
people
Yeah, yeah.
to take me seriously. So hormonal changes, societal expectations.
Struggle is real.
Yeah, they're just very different beings.
Hmm.
Not less or more than the other, but we have our different unique struggles, I think. um Now, in talking about psychiatric illnesses in women. I think traditionally we've long ignored some of these issues and problems. Many people are more aware of what's going on, but we are probably not doing enough. So with my perinatal roles, I'm part of a consultation group. We have a program in Indiana where providers would call in to speak to an expert. And, my role right now is as a perinatal psychiatry / perinatal addictions expert. And you could just imagine what questions, what I thought were basic questions that people will call in to ask or find out about. Like, how do you? It's easy to go through medical school or NP school and go through residency and go through your further training without knowing anything about women's mental health. Like, so easy. But it was one of the unique experiences I had as a trainee here in Indiana. And I've really just leaned into it because there's no one out there really doing this.
Yeah.
So things are definitely getting better, but it's just still a lot to do. I have a lot of work to do. Now, I'll tell you that I am not an expert. I just have had lots of experience doing it.
Doing that,
So I have a few individuals who are like just dedicated to women's health. Joanna Chambers, Dr. Anuado. One of my current fellows, Dr. Enyi, is also, interested in that field. But I've hung out with those people enough to have an understanding of how to approach women, and
even thank you for saying that. Even the name, like, perinatal addiction, it's very heavy, because we know that women by nature are very protective and very self-sacrificial and just give every part of themselves away. So when you have someone in that vulnerable time of their life, being pregnant and being addicted to a substance, and they know, I'm sure at the back of your mind, this is hurting my child, but even with that knowledge, the helplessness that comes from it, so I can't even really imagine just that, almost like that crisis, internal crisis that goes on.
It comes with other things like are you going to go to a hospital where someone drug tests you and reports you to DCS?
I know,
is
right?
DCS gonna come take your kid from
Child
you
away,
after you had your delivery?
And I imagine that will also delay treatment seeking, because they know that once they present in front of you, you're mandated to report. You're a mandatory reporter. Yeah.
There's just a lot of dynamics there, and even post delivery. There's lots of changes during the pregnancy. For example, with a medication like Suboxone, for example, where you might have to change the dose
because of pregnancy.
But you find out that despite having that loss of blood volume after the delivery, many of them still need to be on those high doses for a while before you can dial down the dosing. For example, a lot of medications that we use, like the Vivitrol injection, the naltrexone injection for alcohol use disorder, is not exactly approved in pregnancy. So I've had quite a few patients who were doing very well on the injection and they get pregnant, and we had to switch, I'm not sure it's going to harm you, but it's not approved.
It's not approved for use.
So there are lots of issues there, and I think science still has a long way to go.
And even the clinical trials, pregnant women of childbearing age, they are really protected when it comes to exposing them to medications, especially during clinical trials. Now, for women who might be struggling, I have two struggling questions for you. One category, this would be for women who are struggling with mental health challenges but feel very unsupported or misunderstood due to cultural or societal pressures. What would you like to say about them? And so, what would you like to say to them as a way of just supporting them through this?
So, you know, there's nothing that is as helpful to women in situations like that as actually just finding some sort of support, especially with women that are going through the same thing. And there are lots of organizations that provide those sorts of support. I've met women who are experiencing trauma, domestic violence, and things like that. They tend to do much better with women providers. They tend to do better in groups that have just women. Men sometimes might trigger this
Yeah.
trigger the re-experiencing of the trauma. But whether it's professional help or it's a less structured organization or intervention, I think linking up with other women who understand what they are going through is the most helpful thing, in my opinion, for many of these women.
Yeah. I mean, you've said that's very, very healing, just hearing you say that. And I imagine that your years of practice and experience is something that you're drawing that out of. So I would reiterate that and put that in the chat that we're putting on. The next question would be something I've had to learn because I had someone very close to me go through addiction, and I realized that we're part of the problem in sense of just enabling and um, just having to draw the line of boundaries. Like this is where I'm going to have to draw my boundary, even though I want to keep rescuing you from this. And it was so hard to do. It was very, very hard to do. Like it's almost like you see a train coming for somebody, and your instinct is just to yank them away. But every time you keep doing that, it's like they know you're always gonna keep coming, so they're gonna just keep doing that. And it was hard because I like to fix issues. I see an issue I want to fix. I'm a natural fixer. So for people who are currently, stuck in that dynamics with family members who are struggling with addiction, and there's that whole thing of being an enabler or and all of that. How can we support them?
Yes, I remember when I talked about the definitions of addiction, I talked about
Yes.
negative consequences.
Yes.
And that's something you want to avoid. Now, if someone doesn't have that internal motivation to make a change, it's really difficult.
How do you gauge that? Is it just asking them, like, stage of motivations? How likely are you to quit?
Having a discussion. Now, for the professionals, there are ways of helping someone develop that motivation. There's what we call motivational interviewing.
Yeah, yeah.
Where essentially you are helping them see the disparity between where they are and where they want to be. A professional might be able to do that, but for a family member, that might be tricky. For most people, I think the best thing is just to be as supportive as you can without enabling. Be as supportive as you can.
What would that look like? What would enabling? When do you know that you're beginning to enable?
So enabling, for example, will be, for someone that drinks alcohol, buying them alcohol to drink, right? But if for example I was married to someone who struggles with alcohol use disorder, and I wanted to be a supportive husband, I could stop drinking myself and make sure that there is no alcohol in the house
At home. Yeah.
because that, if my spouse or partner or whoever sees a bottle of alcohol, they could get triggered, right?
Triggered, yeah.
That is a way of being supportive without necessarily enabling the disease. You want to help them with, so even when they don't have internal motivation, you want to help them to be able to access the help they need when the time is right.
Yeah.
So when they go from pre-contemplative
So contemplation.
to, contemplation or preparation, you want to have the right tools. Is it going to be a clinic? Do you need detox? Do you need rehab? You want to have those resources available. So even if they are pre-contemplative, it's still time for you to look out there to see what might be helpful if they change their mind, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
The one other thing that you should also consider is that the destruction of the relationship that happens with addictions. Many of the people who suffer from a substance use disorder often end up, hurting people around them. And understanding that, this isn't a moral failure. This isn't someone making a choice to hurt you. This is a disease, that just a neurobiological basis for addiction. Like, this is a disease like high blood pressure, like diabetes. And some of the things that you experience, some of that trauma that you experience as a family member is as a result of that disease. You don't, I don't want to say don't hold them accountable, but hold them accountable with having it at the back of your mind that this is a part of the disease. It's going to take a while for many people to build
To
trust
understand that,
and build the relationship back up. But you also don't want to cast them out. So in my experience, not talking to someone who has an addiction probably does more harm to them than if you did a quick check-in, or Nigeria now. If you drink too much or you smoke too much, your parents kick you out.
Yeah.
But what they've done in that case is, they've made it. It's still a problem, but the problem isn't in front of them. But it's still a problem.
Yeah.
As opposed to having him, setting boundaries, having him rent his own space, and then paying him visits and reminding him that you are there when he needs you.
Yeah.
That's probably a better, more supportive approach that I think most people can easily do.
Especially considering that if the addiction was because of a familial link, the parents could be partly responsible for this. Yeah. You might be addicted to something that is socially acceptable, like sugar, but your child might pick up addiction, to alcohol or drugs. But addiction is addiction. The medium is just different. Yeah. Thank you for that. What do you think the future of addiction psychiatry is going to be like? Particularly in light of new challenges such as the opioid crisis, right? And this is also evolving into, because fentanyl right now, given just how lethal that is and how they're using it to almost like cut the like almost like cut profits with marijuana and all of that, and kids are just dying. And you're seeing candies laced with fentanyl, and you go to parties, you drink something, for you're already addicted to things. What do you think the future is going to look like for addiction psychiatry, considering those challenges I mentioned, and also integration of digital health tools?
Yes, very promising, very, very promising.
How so?
I joke with my friends that I'll never be out of a job.
Sadly, we hope you don't have like long-term patients, but yeah.
So the way it is that with the substances, some of them we don't actually fully understand yet. And we need the science to truly understand them. For example, cannabis isn't something that we truly know about. There's a lot of research that could happen with cannabis. The FDA, I think, recently declined to approve a psychedelic.
Yeah.
In a way, we kind of discarded these substances because they were drugs. And over the last few decades, someone just was like, wait a minute, maybe MDMA is something we could use for PTSD. So scientifically, there's just a lot to be done. Are these substances that might have some sort of therapeutic benefit? For example, like ketamine is something that is used for depression.
Yeah.
Do they have other roles? You don't want to throw away the baby and the bathwater.
And the bathwater, yeah.
Now, on the other hand, we've also seen this push to legalize something we don't fully understand yet. For example, cannabis. Again, legalizing it puts us in a unique situation where if there was something potentially negative, we are going to find out down the line in our own population, like we are testing it on ourselves.
Yeah.
Right. That's kind of the direction things are headed. I think we did that with tobacco, with cigarettes.
Yeah.
I found out decades later that it causes
lungs.
cancer.
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be done in addiction psychiatry. The one piece that I do enjoy the most is that combination of managing the addiction plus managing the mental health challenges and doing that concurrently. That's the strength of an addiction psychiatrist over someone in addiction medicine. Understanding that it's just one brain. Your brain doesn't say, "Hey, this is the addiction."
This is this is mental health piece. Yeah.
And if you looked at the neurobiology, the same parts of the brain are responsible for both addictions and
mental health. Yeah. Because what we see is the addiction, but there could be underlying factors. So maybe when you treat the mental health issues, it might help provide supportive mechanisms for the addiction.
The only time you find an addiction without mental health is people that drink coffee, and that is even
wait, coffee is not an addiction.
That is even arguable.
I'm excited.
Cafe is the only time where you find a single addiction.
Yeah, without mental health.
Even with that, people that drink coffee, I just want
Dr. Wale, please, let's leave coffee. let's leave coffee out of this. I'm not ready for therapy. I just drink X amount of cups a day. That's how I cope. I don't smoke weed. I don't drink alcohol. Coffee is the only thing. Don't take my joy away.
That's the most common addiction in the US.
And it's only good. It's around every corner. There's a star dust somewhere for your regular fixes. Yeah.
So in terms of treatments, there is also a long way to go. I think tobacco, alcohol, and opioids are the 3 substance use disorders that we have treatment for. We don't have anything for stimulants. We don't have anything for cannabis. We don't have anything for benzos. I'm currently involved in some clinical trials.
Nice.
I'm glad that people are paying attention to things like this. But there's just still a lot to be done. You have patients suffering on a daily basis. Who don't have access to treatments. There is not enough methadone programs around. Those programs are being stigmatized. There's not enough people prescribing Suboxone. The future is bright, like I said.
You're right. All right. I mean, I'm a bit conflicted with cannabis because the argument for number one is it's still a Schedule 1 drug, meaning that under federal law, it's seen as a drug that has a high potential for abuse and no accepted medical use. And that classification actually makes it very difficult to obtain the necessary approvals and funding for research, right?
Yeah.
And even in the compound itself, there's so much variability. Yeah. So I remember when CBD became quite a little bit legal in Oklahoma, overnight, every street had like a CBD shop. Yeah. It's like... Yeah. I live in the Southwest, like Oklahoma is a red state, like all of a sudden, and so there's a variability in the compounds, and the composition, how it's even being formulated, it's not well regulated, right?
The strength.
Exactly, the strength. And there's, potential risk. While I know there's been some argument that it helps with some form of epilepsy, sometimes it might even exacerbate certain mental health conditions, like even anxiety, depression, psychosis. Yeah. And of course, there's that social stigma. Like if your employer should randomly ask for your urine and you have weed in it, you're going to be fired. Then they can legally fire you, right? But I know that if it's decriminalized and made, freely available, we can do more research on it. But then to what end? Like we've seen some places, like in Canada, and I think in Toronto, they decriminalized a lot of medication, a lot of drugs, like heroin and all. and we're seeing those issues, prevalent there. So it's like,
So,
what's,
so yeah, so I see what you're saying, and it's something that I struggle with
same
on
here.
occasion, right?
Yeah.
You are looking at a substance that you know very little about, but you also don't want people to go to jail for smoking cannabis.
No, that one is where I draw the line. Like,
You
we,
know,
yeah,
but
no,
decriminalizing it, or the one thing that I think has I've gained over the last few years studying drugs and how, as a society, we react to drugs is that the problems are not the drugs. The problem has a lot to do with the culture and the society. I'll give you a good example. Portugal decriminalized the use of drugs. I want to say 30 years ago or 40 years ago, thereabouts. I can't remember exactly when.
mhm.
And they haven't had any sort of problems. Now, Seattle,
Yeah,
right? I'm fully aware
Chazon,
of the experience, right?
yeah,
So they did the same thing that Portugal did, but without the ingredients that Portugal had in place. Free healthcare, access to help when you
social
need it.
support, and if this
Those are
society is
those are the
different,
things. Those are the things that you need in play before you take a step like that. You can't have insurance linked to
your
drugs,
employment, yeah,
your employment, and expect to get
it's the
some
same
of these.
outcome.
So we see some of these things happening in other countries. We are trying to emulate them. I think it's a step in the right direction, but we don't fully have the ingredients available, in my opinion. There's a lot
Yeah,
to be done. And this issue has, unfortunately, been, a lot of politics in it for something that is, in my opinion, a purely scientific question.
yeah,
Now we are discussing politics, what party you favor, how much money it's going to cost for people's health. Like, this is their health. So, I'm in favor of decriminalizing cannabis in the sense that I don't want you to go to jail or
for
lose your
for
job
using,
because
yeah,
you smoke weed.
yeah. Now, if you are distributing and you have a plot of land somewhere, it's different. But just smoking it,
No,
no.
that's different. But
Yeah,
I also want us to be able to explore what cannabis is, and if there is a medical reason or indication for using it, then let's explore that and use it to our benefit.
yeah.
Now, the current, this medical cannabis thing, is very akin to what's happening the beginning of the 20th century when they were talking about medicinal alcohol,
Oh, yeah,
looking for an indication for alcohol. And we know right now that alcohol has very, very little benefits. It's more dangerous than it is helpful.
yeah,
So, I want to explore cannabis. I want to know what it does. I want to know what substances are, good or not good. At what level is, back in the 70s, THC level was less than 7%. Now you're looking at 20 or even higher, 20%. But there's 4 groups of people that I talk to about cannabis in my clinic. For one, if you're coming into my clinic and you're sitting across me, you have a bunch of problems. And cannabis, most times when we look at the scale of the problems, cannabis is usually at the bottom of that
yeah.
list.
In the grand scheme of things, yeah.
Yes.
The addiction potential is not quite as. Although someone might
Yes.
say that, yeah, it's not compared to like cocaine or
Compared to even cigarettes,
Oh
right?
yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
But two, in terms of legal drugs, or legality of drugs, I should say, the most dangerous drugs are actually the legal ones.
Alcohol
Alcohol and tobacco.
addiction is so bad.
If you looked at the top 10 causes of death in young people in the US, they are
Alcohol.
linked to alcohol and tobacco.
Yeah, especially alcohol, like
Yeah,
driving drunk and
yeah,
just the addiction, even detoxing. People even die during detox.
yeah.
Yeah,
During detox.
yeah, yeah.
Um, so for me, those four people that I seriously talk about cannabis with are, young people. The growing brain, anyone less than the age of 25 is very, there's studies that have shown cognitive
Decline.
impairments
Yeah,
in
yeah.
people who use
From alcohol.
at cannabis at a very
Oh,
young age.
oh, really?
Yes, yes. There's an Australian study that shows that. So if you're
Wow.
less than age 25 and you're smoking weed, I probably want you to reduce or stop,
I'll stop
ideally.
it if we can. Yeah.
People
Well,
with
that's true.
depression
The
and
brain is
anxiety,
degrading. Yeah.
cannabis really worsens it in the long run. It might provide you some temporary relief, but it really worsens the situation. And folks with a history of psychosis or a risk of psychosis. So those are the four people that cannabis probably jumps up on the list when
Yeah.
we discuss. But aside those, for many other people, it's just at the bottom of the list. When we stop you from drinking alcohol and you're no longer using methamphetamine and you stop smoking cigarettes, we can have a conversation about cannabis. And many people are more open to that conversation at that point.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, your talk on Portugal and Seattle, it was just like definitely what the point you mentioned about the difference in the social support that is available. And Portugal, before they even rolled it out, there was widespread support for it, and their public health system is more robust. Even within Seattle, when they did this decriminalization, it was only for a few drugs. And even at the local level, they have so much heterogeneity in the acceptance. So there was no way it's going to work, So, yeah, I should, start wrapping up now because I've had you on for about 19, but I'm really enjoying talking to you. I could keep talking to you, but I'm curious to know this. Psychiatry is still sometimes considered a crooked science by skeptics, and is misunderstood by many, maybe because it's of the mind. And I remember during earlier part of our conversation, you had talked about for you what made psychiatric unique is the ability to diagnose patients individually, unlike other fields where conditions like high blood pressure created like homogeneous patients, but in psychiatric, each patient is complex and with significant variability in presentations. So can you share just number one, what's your rebuttal to that, psychiatry being a crooked science? And for you, I imagine you've had lots of patients. What is one memorable patient success stories that really drives home that point that there's impact on the work you do as an addiction psychiatrist?
So with the first question, every aspect of medicine is a crooked science.
Be careful.
Every aspect of medicine, because
The
medical
quackery.
knowledge is developing and growing to the point where I believe the saying is that medical knowledge doubles every 7 years.
Mm.
There are different aspects of medicine where we are learning new things, including in psychiatry. I talked about neuroscience as something that I explored before getting into residency. That was not the thought process in the 80s or 90s. And at some point, even before then, we are talking about Freud and psychoanalysis. We've moved from there. We are currently where we are now with evidence, spurred by, things like advances in neuroimaging, evidences of some of the conditions that we treat. For example, with addictions now, there are demonstrable changes in the brain that any lay person can see. Like I can show you an image that, just drives home that point of this patient has an addiction and this one doesn't.
Yeah.
So we are developing every aspect of medicine is developing. Psychiatry is not left behind.
They're left behind. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure in the next 20 years we'll probably find newer things. Very recently, there was this talk about the brain. I believe the book is called Brain on Fire, an autoimmune phenomenon that happened to a woman who was acting psychotic. And, in the past, you would have diagnosed her with, schizophrenia or psychosis or something. But the truth was that she was having those symptoms in response to an autoimmune disease.
Wow. I think you're frozen, Dr. Ojo. Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
the whole point of being a lifelong learner,
Yeah.
catching up with what's new in the field, or, if you're a researcher, being at the forefront of the new things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, with your second question, I have a lot of memorable success stories. Like I said earlier on, the ones that strike me the most are people that come back and tell me they are doing well. But the ones that I remember the most are the ones that don't come back.
Which is good.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's good. I tell them, if you don't
I
come
hope
back,
I never see you again.
I literally tell them that if you don't come back to see me, it's either you're doing very, very bad or you're doing very, very good. So helping someone through the journey of, I have an addiction or I have a problem, not realizing it, or realizing it and needing the help, to the treatment, then after the treatment, and then watching them build their life back up and developing this relationship. That's to me just makes this work worth it. Now, I'll tell you the story of a gentleman who has what we thought was a substance-induced bipolar disorder, and was using methamphetamine, was using opioids, alcohol, cannabis, phenibots, and he came in with his with a family member. He came in with a family member, and he didn't want to be there. He had like zero, just wanted to change things, but was not interested in what I had to say. But he was there because there was this external motivation with the mom being in the room. And he, in my conversation with him, he talked about phenibots as a drug. Now, of all the psychiatrists that this gentleman had interacted with for, I believe, 5 or 6 years, I was the first psychiatrist where he mentioned phenibot, and I'm not going, what's that? Like, I knew exactly what phenibot was. I knew the classes of people that use phenibots. I knew the effects of phenibot, and we had a whole discussion about phenibots. And I literally watched him go from, I don't want to be here, to
this guy gets me.
This is the only guy I'm gonna see. I mean, he's still, we are still struggling. We've had good, good stretches of recovery. We've had bad moments also. But I know that whatever the case is, he knows that when
he has an ally in you. Yeah.
That Dr. Ojo is the guy to go to. And I think for me, that makes that case very
unique. Yeah.
Unique. Yeah.
Yeah, for those that are wondering, phenibut is a chemical similar to, I think, gamma aminobutyric acid. Yeah, it's supposed to be a nervous system depressant, and it's used recreationally as a drug in Russia. It may be unsafe. It's actually sold on Amazon. I don't know if you knew that.
Yeah. My patients get their drugs from everywhere, and there are Reddit pages that are dedicated to. But it's essentially a benzo. And the withdrawals are benzo-like.
Yep. And it has high tolerance. Like, you quickly develop tolerance to it. Yeah, and you have to require higher doses. All right, as we wind down, here's some winding up questions for you. Well, how do you see the future of psychiatry changing, especially with AI and digital health tools? I mean, we're already seeing a little bit of that with, I know in the VA they have virtual reality programs. Say for example, what's that one? Brave Mind. There's SIOS, for PTSD. We're seeing for substance use disorder and opioid disorder, like reset all and all that. But how do you think it's going to be changing more? It's going to be evolving more and more with AI and digital health.
Yeah, so I'm glad you talked about VR, because we have a research program here in Indiana University that essentially uses VR in the treatment of addictions. And totally unique program that a few years ago no one would have envisioned. But with the modern changes post-COVID or during COVID, we've had a lot of shifts in how we think about addictions and how we deliver care. Telepsychiatry is something that is very much, normal these days. There are so many people who are able to access care that, before 2020 probably could not reach a psychiatrist or call a psychiatrist. So that's something that is ongoing. But that also comes with a word of caution, where you don't want to necessarily lose the core of what makes a treatment, and that could happen with many of these new technological advances. We've had clinics pop up online that would prescribe you Adderall without knowing what's going on. The DEA has shut down a few. But I would say in terms of access, there's just an explosion of access that has happened since 2020. I think we are heading in the right direction with that regard. I could manage and treat patients in faraway places in Indiana, and they don't necessarily have to drive down to see me, or at least not every time, not every visit. I'm able to reach them, and I'm comfortable delivering care through that medium, and they're also comfortable receiving care through that medium. So that's the biggest change that I think access is the key word for me in terms of what direction we are going.
Yeah. And that's a whole new conversation to be had, because again, it still comes down to buying power and socioeconomic factors that might preclude people from having access to those kind of resources. So how do you wind down? I mean, you already mentioned video games, so I guess that could be, but outside of your professional life, what hobbies or activities do you enjoy doing?
Video games and country music. Those are the two things that
wait.
that I do.
We get the geology. It took a while to get the geology and medicine. I didn't know there's another Nigeria on this country music table. I love country music. I grew up listening to it. Yeah.
Now, when I say country music, I'm talking about one person in particular.
Don Williams or who?
Don Williams.
Of course. Yeah, it's quintessential. Yes.
That is almost all I listen to. But sometimes I'll do
Kenny Rogers. Oh, yeah. Yes.
It was something I got introduced to, first or second year of college. One of my friends, Lumi, he's currently in the UK. But yeah, those are the two things I do the most. After I had day of work, I want to get on my video game.
What games do you play? FIFA or Mortal Kombat?
Well, I don't play FIFA. I play PES, or I used to play PES. Not so much these days.
With kids and all that, yeah.
Yes. And I play, single player
video games. Okay.
Star Wars, Deathloop. Yeah, and then I listen to Don Williams about once or twice. I'm not a music guy. I don't know what's going on in music, but when I'm on that long drive down somewhere, put on Don Williams and listen. I have all of his 234 songs on my phone.
Now, I mean, music for me, a day without listening to music, it just says a lot about my mental health for that day. Because it's especially for country music, it's a timestamp for me. Because I grew up listening to country music as a child, and I had neighbors who, we had CDs and tapes, and we just over and over again, and it's almost like taking me back to that time. So when I hear music, some songs just evokes like a core memory for me. And
that are literally memories that are coded in my music. I was talking with Olumide earlier today, Lumi.
Yeah.
And he talked about the song, and I knew exactly who he was talking about. And I remember like the time period when we listened to that song and why we dedicated the song to this person.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you. Before you go today, are there some things you wanted to maybe finally talk about that we didn't touch on? Because I know there's so much, we haven't explored. But I'll just give you just a few seconds, like.
So I think it's an important thing to bring up the role that you and T-Dog.
Oh, please don't do that. We already did that. We already done that in the beginning. No. We already did that. Oh my goodness, no. I meant like for addiction and treatment. Oh my God.
No, I'll tell you, it's a very funny story because it was a pivotal time of my life. And I'm not sure I told you guys the back end of the story, but as soon as I got the message from T-Dog, I was in a very low place. I'll tell you that.
Really?
Yes. And I had sworn not to do clinical medicine. I was going to go into the industry. So getting the message from T-Dog about the program in New York, I drove down to New York in my mom's vehicle. I didn't tell her where I was going. And I was the last person applying. Like I literally, I wasn't the last, but one of the last people just walking around the building looking for someone to talk to, handed my resume to the program coordinator who ended up being a very close friend. Got my interview that went bad, in my opinion. I saw a cat just before I got in. Village people have come. They've gotten me.
Cat that I did not see on my way here. I finally found. Was it a black cat?
Black cat, yeah.
It's finished. It's over.
Getting a call later on to update my references, and then getting the message that I got into residency. That was just such a, what's the right word? Serendipity. Because at every point of those steps, I could have decided not to respond to Taiwo's text. I could have decided not to drive down to New York. I could have not found the program coordinator at the right time. There are just so many things that I think lined up for me. I believe in the divine, so I'm sure God had that in plan for me. But the trigger was you guys, and connecting and plugging with you guys was probably one of the best things I've done since coming to the US. So just let T-Dog know that I appreciate his commitment to my cause.
I'll let him know that he's such a, when it comes to residency and matching, because of what he's gone through, every of his friends that he's like, he will just take it personally to make sure that he really helps. And I know that's something that he's very, very passionate about. And I just think at the end of the day, there's a way God just, orchestrates our story, because we've had a lot of people who have helped us as well. And I think for him is a way of just always giving back and making sure that everybody's settled, because we know that Nigerians coming here to practice, you already have the talent, you have the skills, and you don't have those social capital to move up and get match placements, and that can be quite, demoralizing. We're just happy everything worked out well, and thank you. Even though I didn't think I was going to talk about this today, oh my goodness! But for anyone in that space right now, just don't give up. Just keep pushing. Just keep pushing. Just keep pushing. That's just the moral of the story, and I'm glad everything really worked out well. Yeah. No more questions for you because I don't know what else you're gonna say. No more questions for you, but I just want to say thank you. I'm really glad we did this today, and it's been a long time coming, and I'm glad we let it sip like a good cup of tea. maybe coffee, even though you say it's an addiction, which
No,
I'm gonna have
no,
to
no.
start thinking about, like
Coffee,
thinking
no
about this. Muy bueno. Thank you. I've learned a lot, especially your passion for psychiatry, and just the support that lies in um, framework for people who might be having addiction, especially the way we think about addiction, right? And knowing that it goes beyond just somebody just using a substance. There could be other issues at play that we don't always talk about. What we see is the problem, but we don't think about the root causes of it. And yeah, I just want to say thank you so much. And this has been so good and wonderful, wonderful. Thank you to your wonderful wife, by the way. For I know she was working behind the scenes. So Tega, thank you, your true one, and to your kids for letting me borrow their dad for a couple of minutes. That's almost extended to 2 hours. But it was really nice having you on the podcast, and I cannot wait to bring you back in the nearest future. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm glad to be here, and I hope to be back soon. This is I broke my duck with you on a podcast. So
Yay! Yay! I have a feeling you're writing a book. I just have a strong feeling you're writing a book. Or maybe you've been nursing that idea to write a book.
I have a lot to say, but I doubt I'm gonna write a book.
Okay. Well, never say never. You never knew you were gonna come on a podcast, but here you are.
I know, right? I know, right?
You know what they say? Podcast is like a gateway drug. Before you know it now, you're doing shows and writing books and giving TED talks. Never say never. Anyway, I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend, and thank you so much on behalf of every one of us on the podcast. Thanks for coming today, Dr. Ojo. It was nice having you on the podcast.
Same here. Thank you.
All right. Bye, everybody, and thanks a lot. Bye.